Imagine there's no heaven, diddle-doo. It's easy if you try, diddle-doo. No hell below us, diddle-doo. No sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Whatever. You'll hear the record.
There's an old cliche about progress is about standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think we were all privileged to stand on the shoulders of this giant, John Lennon.
I just thought Lennon was a fantastic artist. He spoke through his music. He spoke openly about so many different things that he felt or experienced or he was going through.
He was an incredible influence on the world and the universe. I just think that he was a very charismatic person, and he came on Earth to give a message, and he left.
John Lennon was certainly an international figure. I never realized myself until his death. You have to remember, my mind said I was older, and my mind was on Frank Sinatra, not on John Lennon.
He really was a mirror of what was going on in our society in the 60s. His work just had an edge to it. He was really some kind of odd pop cultural James Joyce figure almost, but he was doing it with music. And his songs were so from the heart. They just moved me, from the simplest love songs early on in his career to the stuff later on in his solo years.
John Lennon was, in my mind, one of the most extraordinary and compelling figures in all of musical history.
Here's a guy, he's lived this amazing life, fascinating figure, strong, brilliant, fragile, very, very human, but more than anything, extremely honest and outspoken. And because he spoke through his art, through his words and music, you really got to know him, whether it was Julia or Mother or, Imagine. He's always telling you what he's going through at the time. And that was the arc of the story that I thought would be best served by this combination of his voice, the moments in his life, and his music.
As I look back, I think a kind of an effect on me was the way he lived his life so openly. We all want to smooth over our warts and imperfections, and to see a person getting so naked in front of the world and being accepted for it, it had to teach us something about life. I often tell people my life is an open book. I started to feel that way when I was watching the way John Lennon lived his life.
I knew the Beatles were popular. I knew they were famous, and I knew they were doing well. But I never appreciated their music or their popularity until I got involved in this film.
There was something so primal and so perfect in the Beatles' inventiveness in music, led primarily by John and, of course, Paul. But it was incredibly accessible music. It was melodic, it was probing, it was challenging to the listener, and it was the soundtrack of our youth.
I think music is a very strong power, of course, and John was really a great songwriter. And also his words were very potent, very powerful words. I think it's very encouraging for people, and it's inspiring,
I had done a film with Andrew Song on Elvis Presley. So I called him and told him I'm going over to see Yoko. She'd asked me about doing a film for theatrical picture.
Well, I thought it was very important, historically speaking, that there would be a good film of him made.
I went over to see Yoko, and she asked me what I think of John Lennon. I said, well, to tell you the truth, I'm not a Beatles fan. I'm a Sinatra fan.
He said that he was a Sinatra fan and he didn't know about the Beatles. I think that would have turned off some people, but in my case, I felt that, okay, well, so he's not a fan. Okay, that's fine. Because that way he can be objective,
She said, well, I don't need a fan, I need a good documentary maker. So that I can do. Fortunately, I've been at Warner Brothers for about 15 years at the time, and I knew all the people there. So I took Andy along. I thought he would be the perfect man for the film, there's no question.
I think Andrew did a great job. In the beginning, I thought, well, what is this guy? Where does it come from? And then, I started to see that he's a very professional and decent person, and I started to relax,
Andy gave me some tapes for my car. I began to listen to the music. I said, these guys are pretty good. But I'll be honest to tell you that I was not a fan at the beginning of this film. I was at the end.
The fear I had, to be honest with you, was here I got to, tell John Lennon's life story, using John's voice, using this material, and I didn't want to screw it up. That was really my main motivation. It was really pretty scary. I was sleeping, eating, drinking, dreaming this. I spent 18 months on it. I was working with David Wolper and Sam Egan and wonderful editors like Bud Friedgen and Bert Lovett.
Both Andrew and David were very willing to accept our ideas. Where they wanted something that wouldn't be appropriate, tasteful or something, they were very willing to listen, and they were very understanding, both of them. That's why they're so good. They listen to the editor.
Andrew had a very difficult job. He came with the concept of doing the picture through the voice of Lennon himself. So once you commit to that, you say, well, now I got to find the picture to match the voice, or the voice to match the picture. It makes it much more difficult. It's easier when you have a narrator. You cut the picture and you write whatever you want. But to do it with the voice of John Lennon was a terrific task. And obviously he pulled it off, because I think that made the film.
And in the end, it was really a labor of love. But thank God for John, his ability, what he gave us to work with, and what Yoko put into play here, all that great material and her presence. And frankly, she was an absolute pleasure throughout the process.
When I made the deal with Yoko, I got it to agree, and I explained to her, I said, you can't have control of this film, because if you do, it's not a documentary. It's a Yoko Ono love piece to John Lennon. If you want to make it a real documentary, you got to trust me. And she agreed to. She said, well, I have to have consultation. I have to say that she loved the film. She loved everything we showed. We didn't have to take anything out because she said, don't put that in the film. Then I said to myself, well, any woman who will have herself photographed in the nude making love to her husband is not going to worry about what's in my film.
Because there was so much material we had to work with, and because Yoko, fortunately, had basically brought cameras into their life, even the first night, or very soon after they first met, I believe the first couple of days when she spent the night with John, there's actually footage of them the next morning at his house.
John Lennon had cameramen following him around doing everything. Who would have films of a famous person in the bathroom? I mean, so we had an enormous amount of film.
Part of the fun were the discoveries. As we were making the film, people would emerge. I mean, one guy from Australia who had done some interviews with certain people like George Martin, which I found. So that kind of thing happened. People contacted us with footage that you wouldn't believe.
What kind of a protest did you make? You said, I don't know much about Nigeria.
An advertising campaign for peace.
Every time the phone rang, Greg Vines and I would say, there's another one out there. People would show up with lawyers. People showed up with security people. There was a brown bag element to this film a little bit, because in addition to the tremendous material we were getting from public sources and from Yoko, we had researchers in about 8 or 10 cities around the world.
What's your favorite part of circus? I like the clowns and the little dogs.
And then we got home movies, and that was very exciting because we got inside, his world, whether it was home movies on tape later on, stuff when Sean was a little kid, private stuff which really revealed a family relaxing and at play rather than an artist with, a spotlight on them. One of the really nice surprises that came about right at the end of the process, before we were finished with the film, Yoko called me and said, we have a track here. It's a demo, John, just him alone with a guitar, singing a song called Real Love, and I'm going to send it to you. It's never been heard. Nobody knows anything about it, but see what you think.
We had the 200 hours of film, which is, the first cut of the pictures, I recall, was something like 14 hours.
There are many different cuts. I mean, sort of like there was a process going.
Andy and I had to sit down, and we cut it down to about 6 hours.
There's a moment in the film that I think is so important because it kind of resonates to the tragic ending, which is when this kid is sleeping in the bushes at Tittenhurst, and they're filming inside, and the cameras, as usual, are rolling, and somebody from the security side says, there's this guy out there, he looks like he hasn't slept or he hasn't eaten in days, and he's probably on acid, and John goes to meet him at the front, and they stay away from him a bit, and the guy says, you're singing those songs to me, man. You've written them for me. And he's as sure of that as anything. And there, Lennon not only is open and accessible to a guy like this, but he invites him in the house and gives him something to eat.
John's reaction was to invite the world in, to see him for who he was. It's without precedent, and certainly in the musical world. And I think that was so much at the core of John Lennon that it defined him.
So it's that side of John, that openness, the vulnerability, and at the same time, what a loss. I mean, this guy had so much more to do, so much more to enjoy, so much more life to live. And 40 years he goes down. He went down 2 years younger than Elvis did, and tragically, by another man's hand. It's a tragic Shakespearean story in a certain sense.
We had become so intimate with him by, we literally had all of the film that he'd ever participated in his life, still pictures, tape recordings, and so I thought we knew him better than anybody by the time the project was over. And to know anyone is to love them, and that's what happened with us.
I'll never forget where I was the moment I heard that John Lennon died. I was driving in a car in Hollywood. I'll be very honest with you, I broke down in tears. My wife and many of our friends were feeling the same thing, and the only way we could cope was to have a memorial service. It was part of working through the grieving process, even as fans, that spoke to the power of what this man did for us.
People considered John a friend. People thought they knew this guy. I felt that too. I felt like, he's been so open with me. He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know anything about me, obviously, but I know who he is. And he was so upfront about every aspect of his being that when he left us and when he was taken from us, and so stupidly and tragically, I think we all felt like we lost a great friend. And what's very emotional and powerful is the outpouring of what people had to say and the signs they carried and the moments of silence around the world and the things that Yoko said, let's do this in memory of John, let's give peace a chance. So I would say, thank you. Thank you for all the joy. Thank you for the pleasure. Thank you for your art. Thank you for your work and your writing and your thinking and your openness.
For his music, for his art, and for his concern for humanity.
I'd say, John, save me tickets for the Beatles reunion.
I'd tell him not to go home that night. Make it an all-nighter in the studio.
He was somebody who believed in something strongly and did something about it. And that's why I think I'd tell him that's an honor worth having.
People come to me and sort of whisper to me, it would be much better if John's around now, And I think people feel that a lot. And I can understand that, but also they have to understand that John's words and music are still around, and his spirit is still with us.
He'll never be forgotten for his simple message, give peace a chance, because John meant it. And every day that goes by, those simple words take on more and more meaning.